Hello and welcome to Church Online with the Denver Church of Christ. My name is Chris Zillman, and today I'm joined by my wife, Megan.
Yes, your lovely wife, Megan.
It's great to have you here, and it's so awesome to have the kids with us once again. And today we're talking about the concept of partnership for the sermon.
Which makes sense.
Yes, because we are partners. And, what do you think some of the best partners in the world are?
Well, that's one of the things I was thinking we could ask the kids, because I'm sure you guys have some thoughts about who the best partners in the world are, okay? So just to get you started, we have a few. So I'm going to say one part of the partner, and you tell me who its partner is. So for instance, Batman and...
The Joker.
You guys know it's Robin, right?
Oh, Robin.
Batman and Robin, partners.
Can I try?
Go ahead.
All right. Peanut butter and jelly.
Peanut butter jelly time?
All right, you got another one?
Yes, I do. In keeping with the food, bacon and eggs.
Eggs.
Right? Those are great partners.
Yeah.
Or how about this? For the princess fans out there, Anna and Elsa.
Elsa.
Right. Great partnership.
Do you have some adult ones, maybe? Maybe we can get the adults to join with us?
There are some good. I was thinking Frodo and Sam.
Yep.
For all you fantasy nerds out there.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Martin and Gina.
Gina. Yeah, that's a partnership.
How about Mom and
Dad? There you go. Nacho y Scalito.
So what we thought the kids could do today is we were wondering if you could draw a picture of your favorite partnership. It could be you and your brother and sister. It could be your superheroes. It could be princess. It could be whatever.
Bacon and eggs.
It could be bacon and eggs. Why don't you draw a picture of that, please? And when you get done drawing a picture, have your parents send that picture to the number below. And we'll once again make a movie and post it on Facebook. And you can watch the movie once it's done being produced later this week. But kids, it's always great to have you with us. And we are entering into our last week of the series for the month of June called The Last Man. And this series, the term Last Man is kind of a poetic adaptation of 1 Corinthians 15, where Jesus is called the second Adam or the last Adam. And, we were all made in the image of the first Adam. But that is a fallen entity. Adam and that image is a fallen concept, and we were remade into the image of the last Adam, which was Jesus, and his resurrection is a prototype of our own future. And so it's up to us to use the time that we have in this life to emulate this last man who is Jesus. And so we've been looking at some of the more astonishing qualities of Jesus as we seek to imitate our last man. And today we titled this last sermon in the series Partnership. And here's the thing. I think very few great men or women are noted for their ability to have close relationships. Their drive for fame and for glory usually necessitates a certain kind of isolation, ruthless isolation from relationships. But the story of Jesus is filled with partnerships, and him being one of the greatest men ever, if not the greatest, the greatest man ever.
I would say, yeah.
No ifs.
No close seconds.
But he was someone that pursued partnership as a part of his mission in this world. And he paved the way for men and women to see each other as more than a role. And for us to see the value in one another that we have before God as individuals. And so we wanted to study this concept this week and to close out our service, because I really do think that this has become a bit of a weakness for our culture. One of the truths about following Jesus and having a relationship with God that has always been one of the most challenging is that you have to do it with people. You have to do it in conjunction with relationships.
No lone rangers.
There is no relationship with God without a relationship with others. We cannot do God by ourselves. Faith requires partnership.
Yep.
And so, 1 John 4:19-21 says this: we love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates his brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister.
Yep.
It's built into the DNA of our faith to have partnership with one another if we love God. These are inseparable characteristics of true believers. And the fact is that Jesus, while God, made it obvious that his partnership to other men and women was integral to his mission to save the world. But sometimes I don't think that we see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Too often, I see people treat relationships as though they were commodities, something to be used and then disposed of when they no longer serve an adequate utility. And I'm often dismayed by the lack of depth to the friendships and partnerships that people have in this world. And the superficial nature of these relationships becomes even more obvious when you apply heat and pressure to those relationships. And I think that we're living in a time of incredible heat
and pressure.
pressure.
Absolutely. And we're seeing some of the strains.
And I guess what I would say is, during these storms, how are your partnerships doing?
Mm.
I find modern sensibilities about friendship somewhat amusing because I think most people in the world in which we're all walking believe that they have a more evolved idea of what relationship is than maybe their parents did or the people before them, because they believe in concepts like tolerance and open-mindedness. And yet, I find increasing amounts of people have positioned themselves to live within echo chambers, surrounded by acquaintances and companions that merely echo back to them their own ideologies and tenets for life. And anyone that does not share those views are considered their enemy, and an enemy of what is good and what is moral, and therefore not worthy of friendship. As a matter of fact, friendship with such people would be considered a betrayal of principles. Thus, I think most people, in fact, have highly primitive and somewhat barbaric notions of what relationship is. And certainly in our present social climate, this could not be more evident than it is right now.
Yep.
Where dissenting words can carry the consequence of ending a friendship, where disagreements about society are finishing relationships. And this behavior, to me, is unmasking the true lack of depth that people have in their notions of family and of friendship and relationship. And this has been a very unhappy revelation, even within the church during these days of pressure and tension and great soul searching.
Yep.
I believe that we have a lot to learn, and our love for God is under judgment as a result. A real faith legacy that we've been talking about all year long necessitates partnerships with greater depth of love, with more perseverance, with self-sacrifice, and more than we seem to be demonstrating in these present moments.
Yeah.
And while I believe that friendship and partnership are synonymous most of the time, I also think that because of the diminishing standard that the world has for friendship, I would like to make a distinction between partnership and friendship for the purposes of this sermon. The concept of partnership finds its origin in the notion of sharing. And it's for two people to both be heirs of a gift or of an inheritance. And they have to share that gift or inheritance. And thus the gift becomes something that can't be divided. The gift is only something that can be shared. And so the two parties that inherit that gift are intertwined. Mm-hmm. They cannot be untethered from one another without losing their gift and without losing their inheritance. In a very real sense, they're stuck with one another, mm-hmm. though I don't really think that's a helpful way to think about it.
But sometimes we do.
Yes. I think if we are bound together in a gift, and in this case, our gift is Jesus, then we have to make our partnership something that isn't merely tolerant of everybody in the party, but it has to be a partnership that produces maturation, a partnership that produces growth. And I think that this is the type of partnership I believe Jesus is asking us to have with one another. And so I thought maybe you and I could have a little conversation about partnership.
Let's have a conversation about partnership.
And what some of the concepts are that make for meaningful partnerships. And I thought maybe the first thing we could discuss would be trust.
Yeah, I think trust is a huge one. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's all right. But I think that we both agree that if we're gonna have meaningful friendships and relationships, then trust has to be evident and it has to be consistent.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think as we were talking about trust, I think it's one of these concepts that we all say yes, and we grab it, yes, to trust. But then when you really think about it, you kind of like, yes, because it's risky. Trust is hard. The cost, I think, of trusting someone is high. My most probably poignant verse that I think about when I think about trust is Proverbs 17:19, the one that says, "He who builds," it's kind of the end of the verse, but it says, "He who builds a high gate invites destruction." And
Which seems counterintuitive.
it does seem counterintuitive, right? You build a gate to protect what's on this side of the gate. But here the scriptures say, no, you do that and you invite destruction. And one of the things, I don't know if you would agree with me in seeing this, but I think in my experience, I see people, we build our high gates for two reasons. The first one is to just try to avoid getting hurt. And that's probably more the newbies that do that.
Right.
And I think we could probably is it a fair assertion to say that trust, you will get hurt. Relationship, partnership, like we're talking about, is not possible without hurt.
Which is probably why people build their gates in the first place, is because they've had a past of getting hurt, and therefore they build that wall so it doesn't happen the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny because I think the only place that you see partnerships happening without the hurt, or it seems to be built in that there shouldn't be hurt, is in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Which I don't think we should trust.
Or just very superficial relationships.
Trust. Yes, exactly. These very superficial relationships. I think one of the things that I have to understand if I'm going to have true partnership is I will be hurt. I have to accept that as a part of the process, but will I still trust the partner? And these partnerships can be anything: marriage, kids, one another, relationships in the church, work, any level of partnership, right?
Yep.
But and to your point, I think that's the other thing. You kind of said this already, but we build high gates because we have been hurt. And I've seen this so much in the church, honestly. I see this mostly in the church because we don't go anywhere, but we get hurt and we build up our gates in order to try to prevent ourselves from getting hurt again. But if I'm hurt already and I build up my gate, the only thing that's behind my gate is my hurt, my anger, my bitterness. And so it just kind of festers. It seems counterintuitive, but my walls have to be lowered in order for that.
Well, totally.
Trust
And
to
then the
come up.
only way to get in is to attack the wall.
And how would you attack the wall?
I don't really know. I'm not a siege builder, but catapults.
I thought that was a smooth lead into the next thing we were going to talk about. My bad.
Well, I would just say that along with trust, I think when you have trust, there are certain things that are evident, like transparency.
Yes.
That partnerships that are real, that are genuine, are partnerships where each person is transparent to one another, and not just transparent, but also vulnerable, because there's a difference there, right?
Absolutely. Well, that's one of the things I think about. Again, you hear, I don't know if guys talk like this, but women, we talk like this. Like a lot of times we'll say, I am just going to be real and I'm going to keep it real. And there's this idea that if I'm real, that equals being vulnerable, but I don't think those things are always the same, because I can be real. I can tell the truth about a situation without letting you know anything about who I am.
Yeah.
When I think about vulnerability, there really is a desire to be known, to make myself known, and to know the other person. And it's to know the good, the bad, the ugly. If I'm just trying to present the good or the non-tense parts or whatever, it's not truly vulnerable. But I've got to learn to be vulnerable by really exposing who I am to people. I think Jesus did this. I mean, I see him giving his strengths and his weaknesses. He showed it to his partners.
Well, I think sometimes we get duped into believing that being vulnerable is expressing where we've been hurt. And that certainly is
It's a part of it.
That's a part of vulnerability. But it's also exposing where we are weak.
Yeah.
It's allowing people to, in some ways, see our weaknesses, to help us in our weaknesses, our mistakes, where we're on the verge, like where we can no longer keep an image together, where we can't,
That's it.
These little fronts, these layers that we put in front of us, when we can't hold that together, I think vulnerability is, I'm falling apart. Can you help me?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and what would you say, there's a phrase that I hear a lot when it talks about trust, the speed of trust, the idea of moving at the speed of trust.
Yeah.
How does that fit in here?
Well, I think that a relationship doesn't happen overnight, first of all, and it's unrealistic to go, okay, let's be friends. I'll tell you everything about me, you tell me everything. That's not really how humans work.
Especially if we've been hurt, right?
Totally. And so I do think that there is, I mean, some friendships take years to grow, and it's good. But I do think that it takes an intentional process of, okay, I'm going to, even though I don't feel like it, I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you a part of me that I'm afraid for you to know, or I'm going to let you in. But I don't think anybody just opens up the gates and lets everybody in right away. Yeah. Although I think the wisest people probably are the best at that.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and at the end of the day, it probably comes back to how much do I trust God?
Yeah.
Because I'm putting myself out there. Am I trusting that if I do this in order to build these partnerships, that God will ultimately, he'll take care of me and he'll protect me and he'll pick me up when I'm hurt.
Yeah. When I think when we get beyond trust, so trust is obviously a component of partnership that's completely integral. But I think another component is the idea of personal sacrifice, that if we're going to have friendships, we're compromising something. Like we're going to have to give something up. And, to go along with our scripture for today, which is John 15, that's taken in context of the Last Supper that Jesus is having. And he kind of opens up that supper in John 13 by washing his disciples' feet. Mm. And, up until this moment, Jesus has been the master, the rabbi, the teacher. He is obviously the leader in every single way. And in this moment, he puts aside that role, and he puts aside, and in every single way, he sacrifices the distinction of that role, and he gets on his knees and he washes the disciples' feet. And he makes this sacrifice so that he can be a friend to his disciples. Yeah. What else would you say about personal sacrifice and its role in building partnership?
I think one of the biggest thing I would think is just kind of this notion of personal sacrifice. When we really dissect it and get down to the nitty gritty, it goes deeply and profoundly against what we're taught in the world. Relationships and partnerships need to be about, right? Yeah. And when I think as the world talks about relationships or healthy partnerships, it's always in terms of power. It's kind of like there's two equals standing side by side. We're both equally empowered, and this is what healthy partnership is. And you see, I mean, the easiest context to think about it in is with male, female, husband, wife, whatever, in this relationship, because especially if you're a woman, I'm definitely, from the time you're little now, you're taught, look, you don't need a man. I don't need a man. I don't need him. Right. But I have my own power now, and so I don't need. And yes, there's truth to that. Like, does he need me? Do I need him? Well, no. We both have our power bases or whatever. But I just think it's a curious place for us to plant a flag if we're Christians. Because for me, the breakdown comes because I follow a man who, the Bible says, being in very nature God, didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing. And he took on the nature of a servant and became obedient to death on the cross, And so when I think about Jesus, he spent really his whole life, and his death obviously was one of self-sacrifice so that I could be raised up, so that we could be lifted up. And I think he was imitating his Father in that. It always amazes me when I think about God, the creator of the universe, that he would enter into covenant with me, with his people. But when he entered into covenant, wasn't he limiting himself? I mean, there was bits of self-sacrifice. He's saying, I will act like that and I won't act like this. And he limited himself so that I could know that I could trust him, so that I could know how to behave in him. So I see this in God. I see this in Jesus. And so for myself, it was his self-sacrifice that allows me to have this hope. And shouldn't that be what I'm aiming for there and helping other people? I have to wrestle critically with this because it doesn't come natural to me. Like I don't want to give up my power. I don't want to deny myself for other people. I want to kind of build up my own little kingdom. John the Baptist's words always echo in my mind when he said about Jesus, he must become greater, I must become less. I've wrestled with that scripture so much because I want to become greater. I want my own little kingdom instead of, no, this is about, laying down my life to make other people
Well, and
better.
this is really what is, I mean, when you talk about running counter to society today, I mean, there was almost violent revulsion in people to this idea
Yeah.
that I am going to allow you to be greater than me. I'm actually going to step down so you can be greater than me. And an expectation that people would live that way together is, like I said, it's almost revolting to modern
Sensibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet, I think when you see it played out in Christianity, you see how
Yes.
much it works.
Yeah.
You know, you see the honor that people, and it's also why people of that are coming together from different places in life, whether it's wealth or whether it's culture or whether it's age, you see it can work out,
Yeah.
bringing all these different people together when this is practiced in partnership.
Yep.
You know, I think, you know, moving on beyond personal sacrifice, I think the other part of building partnership is that it takes initiative.
Mm.
You know, and specifically, it takes initiative to make someone your peer,
Yes.
to make them in an equal relationship with you. And that word equal carries a lot of weight to it. So I would use the word peer. And the story that I always think about is the friendship between Jonathan and David, which is one of my favorite relationships in the Bible. And there's this verse, it's right after David slays Goliath. And in 1 Samuel 18, verse 1, it says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic, and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. And, you know, part of the story is that Jonathan had to sit out. I think his father, this is my conjecture, made him sit out this fight with Goliath because Jonathan kind of started this war with the Philistines. And he had twice attacked the Philistines on his own. And so you have Jonathan, who's just this, he wants to fight. He trusts God and he wants to fight for God. And then in David, he sees another man who wants to fight. He sees someone who is like him. And he's like, this is a guy that I want to be partners with. But the problem is, David's a shepherd and Jonathan is a prince. I mean, he's the heir to the throne. And so the only way this partnership works is if Jonathan can make David more. And so what he does is he takes off his princely clothes, his tunic, his robe, his sword, and he gives it to David so that when people see David, they no longer see a shepherd, they see a prince equal to Jonathan. And I think it's this type of behavior of showing initiation to make someone your peer that is also integral to creating these partnerships. And I do think many people fail in this. I don't think they know how to be equal with others. I think sometimes people are very comfortable when they have their superiors at work, like, okay, these are my bosses, this is the boundary, I understand that boundary and I'm comfortable with that and I can live with that. Or they understand, like even with employee, like these are my employees or these are the people that work under me, and they're comfortable with that. And I think even in the church, we can do this same thing. And I think where those boundaries become gray is in this peer area where I find so many people weak at creating meaningful peer relationships because these boundaries or these lack of boundaries are uncomfortable for them. But it's those peer relationships that I feel often push us the most in maturation. They have the ability to push our buttons. We don't let our bosses into our lives. We don't let the people that we lead into our lives the same way that we let our peers into our lives. And oftentimes our peers are in similar life situations. They're like, no, I see you. Mm-hmm. Like, I understand you better than everybody else. And we have to work to make that happen at times.
Absolutely. Well, I think a peer presses on our insecurities, our fears about ourselves. What you're saying there, I think it's the opposite of what comes natural. You know, I was thinking about the difference between the statement of saying, look, I am your equal, and saying, you are my equal.
Right.
Like those two things.
The world of difference between those two things.
So different.
Yeah.
And for me, early on in ministry, Chris can attest to this. Early on in ministry, this was like major struggle city for me because it just went so far against me. Before I was a Christian, I had to prove myself always. I'm going to be the best at everything I do. And if I can't be the best, I'm not going to do it. And that's how I could, feel good about myself. And so then I became a Christian and I got spiritual about it, but that same character was in me. So I just kind of changed the metrics of my competition, right? So, as a disciple, especially early on in the ministry, I would look at these other women that are now some of my dearest friends, but again, it was competition. It was hard for me to be peers because I wanted the people that were training us to think I was doing a better job. I wanted them to think I was wiser. I wanted the people that in the ministries that we led, I wanted them to think, well, Megan connects with us more than Melissa connects with her women, or just all of this was so exposed. And for years, this has been the major area where God has had to work on me, because you can imagine that affected my friendships, that affected my partnerships. And I'm grateful because I've grown a lot in the last 25 years, but it still certainly is in me. We moved to Denver almost a year ago now, although we've been stuck in our house for a third of that time, so it seems a little short at points. But, so when I moved, we're in a new situation, and it comes out in me again. Like, I feel like, okay, with my peers, and with that, I need to prove my competency. I need to be the best at this. I need to be the wisest at this. I need to be the funniest here. These things are exposed to me. Again, these things that come up and prevent me from really wanting a solid partnership, because I don't want to elevate people. I want to be, again, because of my own insecurities.
Yeah.
So moms do this a lot, at the playground. There's those subtle, like, oh, my kid and my kid. But
dads do it a lot at the ballpark.
Dads do.
That's
I didn't mean you. I meant dads.
You pointed at me though.
Well, yeah. But
and I think it's natural. I think there are some things that we can do that make it easier.
Yep.
And I think one of them is to go out of our way to express admiration for our peers.
Yes.
Verbal,
That's good.
Like lifting up the people that we are peers with, and expressing that admiration to them and to others. And there's just something about the process of bringing out of the inside of you to words the good things that you feel and admire about others that changes the way you feel about that relationship.
It does.
I think another thing is just serving your peers.
Yeah.
Going out of your way to be of service to them. And I find this in all areas of life. Once you start serving people, your heart softens in almost everything. Yeah. But it's the same with our partnerships. When we serve those we want to be partners with, when we serve our peers, our heart just changes towards them. And then lastly, time. Spending time with people, making ourselves to spend time with people is just healthy, and it overcomes a lot of the internal storms within us.
It's true.
As we're trying to build these relationships.
It's true. This is also true for the introverts.
Yes. No, absolutely. We're going to take up communion in just a minute. But before we do, let's close out with a few thoughts. The fact of the matter is that biblical relationship and biblical partnership is running increasingly counter to what is valuable to the modern man and to the modern woman. Namely, that one would put self voluntarily into a position of lesser esteem than somebody else, to literally make in every way and in every situation other people more valuable than you are, and then to trust that God will take care of you with all of your needs. This is a concept that is anathema to the emerging modern culture. I think we're all familiar with John chapter 13 and what Jesus does in that chapter to wash his disciples' feet. But here's the thing. That was not just some kind of symbolic gesture. It wasn't an act that was paying homage to an ideal of servanthood and achieving partnership through serving. It's not a gesture. It's not an homage to an ideal. It is a man literally making himself less so he could make his friends more. It's the epitome of partnership. And I sometimes have to ask if we're losing the thread of this culture within our church by instead getting caught up in a worldly culture that would bind us to our ambitions, to our own sense of self-importance, to our little isolated worlds. When we make biblical partnerships, that's where we find God. It was God himself who uttered through Jesus in John 15, verse 15, "I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you." At the end of his mission, before the greatest and most heroic feat upon which hangs the whole of our faith, Jesus wanted to make sure that he made it publicly known. You are not mere students to me. You are my partners. You are my friends. He abandoned every right and every privilege due him so that he could call mere men and women his partners. It is this sentiment that we cannot allow the world to snuff out of existence in a misplaced glorification of self and individual vanity. Jesus laid down his life for his partners, and then he called us to be willing to do the same for anyone that is in the family of believers. And that act there, us laying down our lives for one another, was to bind us together in partnership in ways that could not be broken by circumstance or by culture or by any difference between us that a superficial and untrustworthy world might try and create. Such partnerships leave a powerful legacy of what God can do between people and with people and through people. Let's go ahead and pray for communion now. God, thank you so much for your Son, who taught us how to create partnership, who taught us how to make relationship and friendship. God, we're so grateful for him making himself almost as nothing so that he could know us and be one of us. God, we're so grateful for the life that he lived. As we take the bread up right now, we remember the way that he was with people, the way that he was with his friends, and the way that he made his friends his peers, and he made them his partners. And God, as we take up the fruit of the vine, we remember that he shed his blood for those same friends, laying down his life for his friends. God, I pray that we would be a church that does the same for all of our partnerships, that we would be a church that lays down our own lives for our family, that we would not be pushed and pulled by the winds of the world, but we would instead be focused on Jesus and the way that he was a friend to the people around him. God, thank you so much for our partnerships. Thank you so much for the example in Jesus. We love you so much. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen.